welcome to this India Today special, where we are joined by a very special guest. His new book, Why I Am a Hindu, promises to be controversial and eminently readable. My guest today is Member of Parliament and author Shashi Tharoor. Welcome, Shashi, to this show. And let me start by asking you the timing of your book, Why I Am a Hindu. And the reason I ask you this comes in the lead up to general election year, and after Rahul Gandhi's recent temple hopping in Gujarat in particular, it appears to be part of the Congress drive, some would say, to reclaim Hinduism.
Well, look, I mean, I certainly do want to reclaim Hinduism, but most of the book had been written before Rahul Gandhi hopped temples, as you claim, in Gujarat. I think he was doing the right thing that politicians and all parties tend to do, which is to visit places of worship during the campaign trail. I've done it myself, but you guys made a big story out of it. So yes, he did it, but by that time most of the book was written. A book like this doesn't get written in a few weeks, Rajdeep. I've been mulling over it for a long time. It was something that I wanted to write at this time, and the way in which the election played into my timing is that I knew I had to get it out of the way before I got too immersed in constituency work to be able to devote the time required to writing or finishing this book.
But there is a sense that the Congress is desperately trying to shed its image of being seen as a pro-Muslim party, an anti-Hindu party, which is a reason why Rahul Gandhi is going temple hopping, which is why Shashi Tharoor, ahead of general elections 2019, as the Congress's premier public intellectual, is writing a book on his Hindu belief system. Somewhere in this book, I get a sense that you are trying, as you even have a chapter on, to reclaim Hinduism.
That's right. Well, I think Hinduism needs to be reclaimed for the Hindus who are not bigots, who are not the kind of people who destroyed the Babri Masjid. The fact is that Hinduism is indeed the faith of the majority of Indians, 80%, and that's probably true of a large number of congressmen as well. Why should we play into the BJP's hands by allowing them to portray the debate about the nature of this country, the debate over the idea of India, into a debate between Hindus and secularists? It's actually not between Hindus and secularists alone, but between two different kinds of Hindus in the first place. There are the Hindus who sincerely believe in an India that belongs to everybody, who believe in Swami Vivekananda's view of Hinduism, and then there are those Hindus who have a much more narrow, petty, bigoted, sectarian view of the faith. It's time that the first kind of Hindu stood up against the second.
But let me ask you once again this political viewpoint, the viewpoint that the Congress is making an extra conscious effort through Rahul Gandhi to somehow or the other send out the message, look, we are a party that also represents Hinduism.
Yep.
We are now told he's going to travel through mutts in Karnataka. I'm just trying to understand, is there a conscious attempt being made by the Congress to end what you believe has been the monopoly of the BJP over the Hindu religious space in politics?
Yes, and to end, frankly, also the mischaracterization of the Congress party. Our secularism was perhaps the wrong word, because the right word is pluralism. We're a party that's always believed that India is a country for people of every background, every faith, every language, caste, creed, the whole works. And somehow that has been distorted by our political critics and enemies into reducing the Congress party to sort of party of minority appeasement. Look, we work with minorities because we believe they have as much right to India as we do. But that doesn't mean that we have suddenly ceased to be Hindu. On the contrary, we think we're better Hindus than they are because we are truer to the spirit of the Hindu faith, as I've argued in the book.
But there is editorial comment, and perhaps even in the arguments of your book or critiques of your book will say this is Shashi Tharoor resorting to some kind of soft Hindutva, soft Hinduism in an answer or response to hard Hindutva, that you are trying to challenge it. Now, can that sort of wannabe Hindutva in a way, or soft Hindutva, ever really compete with the Hindutva of the Savarkars, the Golwalkars, dare I say, of a Narendra Modi?
But though that's precisely the point, that theirs is a very different interpretation of Hinduism from that which I believe is sustained by our scriptures, by our great teachers, and by the lived experience of most Indian Hindus. Most Indian Hindus have grown up with a Hinduism that is truly accommodative, welcoming, and functions in a society in which acceptance of difference is key. What did Swami Vivekananda say in Chicago, Rajdeep? He said Hinduism teaches not just tolerance, but acceptance. You know, tolerance, after all, is a slightly patronizing position. It says, I have the truth, I believe you're in error, but I would indulge you in the right to be wrong. Whereas acceptance says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth, and we'll get along just fine. That's the Hinduism that most congressmen believe in and practice.
When you say, for example, in the book, that despite attracting the opprobrium of the Hindutva brigade, I do believe that propagating Dharma and installing at all levels the need to live according to one's Dharma can be the key to bridging the gap between the religious and the secular in India. Are you entering dangerous terrain? And define Dharma for me.
Well, as I've taken an entire page to do it in the book, I won't even try and give you a one-word answer. In fact, I've explained that there are literally 40 different meanings for Dharma. But one of the simplest phrases that I've also quoted is that by which we live. It is the right way of living, right? Doing the thing right, doing the right thing. Now, what's interesting about this issue is I actually find myself somewhat in sympathy with the Sangh Parivar when they argue that secularism should translate into dharma nirpekshata, and that is simply un-Indian. In fact, I have argued 20 years ago in India from midnight to the millennium that secularism is a misnomer in India. It happens to be the word that was used, but it means something very specific in a Western context that is not relevant. In India, we should have talked about pluralism from the beginning. But I am in favor, if you like, panth nirpekshata. That the state has to be completely agnostic or neutral between different sects, faiths and religions. That is where, unfortunately, the advocates of a Hindu Rashtra fail. They may be right that you cannot be dharma, you cannot put aside dharma, that everybody has their own dharma irrespective of whatever faith they've come from, whatever religion they practice, and they must live according to the values and principles of their dharma. But that doesn't mean that you are now saying that we are going to privilege only one dharma, that is a Hindu dharma as defined by the Sangh Parivar. That is unacceptable. It's also unconstitutional.
It's interesting that someone like you, who's written a book on Nehru, who claims to be a Nehruvian constitutionalist, is now saying that I have some agreement with the Sangh Parivar on the notions of dharma nirpekshata, because there will be critics of this book who will say this is Shashi Tharoor in a sense distancing himself from Nehruvian secularism. Nehruvian secularism was seen in some way as a westernized concept, unsuited to India. Now Shashi Tharoor is trying to find a more rooted definition of secularism by using the word pluralism to replace Nehruvian secularism.
In all fairness, I used it 20 years ago, and in my Nehru biography, I've made very clear my admiration for what he did through the term secularism, that is to create an India where religion wouldn't determine your opportunities in life.
Yes.
But Nehruji was an agnostic himself. I'm not. I'm a believer. So there is already a profound difference there. When I go, to a place of worship, or when I worship in my own puja room at home, I am obviously in that sense being different from the kind of modern scientific temper, rational agnosticism that Nehruji personally practiced. But Nehruji had a great respect for religion as culture. And in fact, if you read his marvelous description of the Ganga, you will find no reference to religion in it, but it's a tremendous evocation of the significance of the Ganga in the cultural, spiritual consciousness of Indians, particularly northern Indians. So he was very rooted in India, don't get that wrong. It's just that he didn't particularly have patience for religion, for sants, for mahants, for Maulvis either.
Are you saying then that politicians of secular India can openly identify with any religion and still be secular?
Provided they don't let it influence the conduct of the state. You see, I may be a believing Hindu, but I have no right, if I were a minister of the government of India, to take a single decision that privileges somebody because he's also a Hindu, or that opposes somebody because he's not one. That is the difference. So pluralism says, I see everybody as equal, I treat everybody as having the same constitutional, legal, moral rights in my frame, and I've had no difficulty living that way myself, Rajdeep.
Because N.R. Narayan Murthy, former Infosys founder, the Infosys founder, once said, Indian public figures should eschew all religion. They should practice in private, but in public never flaunt their religion. Because today the Prime Minister, for example, when he has a Ganga Aarti, it's on live television. Do you believe that is advisable or not?
No, actually, my first instinct would have been to agree with my good friend, Mr. Narayan Murthy, and that was indeed the way I lived. You guys haven't seen me praying, but I've been praying every single day of my life since I was 6 years old, right? So what's the issue here? What I'm saying is that by doing what Sri Narayan Murthy has recommended and what has been the instinctive practice of most of us, we have essentially ceded a political terrain to the BJP, which through ostentatiously showing its own Hinduism or its own religiosity is essentially trying to say we are the only Hindus. Now, they're not the only Hindus. We are also Hindus, but we are a different kind of Hindu from what they are.
You know, the trouble with this argument could then be that the Congress could somewhere find itself trapped. That the BJP will say, we wear our Hinduism on their sleeve. The Congress, on the other hand, has never really been fully convinced how far to go with wearing their Hinduism in public life. To that extent, is the Congress, or Shashi Tharoor in particular, looking to shed the past and look to possibly a new future where Hindu religiosity is very much part of your public life?
It is, but it's not the only thing. I'll give you the example of my own constituency, Rajdeep. I represent a constituency that's only 55% Hindu, is 45% other minorities. But the fact is that I am myself somebody who goes openly to temples and equally openly go to mosques and churches. Every Christmas Eve, with the sole exception of last Christmas when my son's wedding reception was happening, every Christmas Eve I have been at a midnight mass in my constituency, and I've been acknowledged by the Christian leaders there for my respect for their faith. But that doesn't make me, I openly say I'm a Hindu. I make a speech on Christmas Day. I don't pretend to be an ersatz Christian. I show the kind of respect for their faith that I believe true Hindus are capable of, and indeed are taught and tutored into believing and showing.
You know, where I am coming from, and this is part of your book, because you try and look for a challenge to political Hindutva, which you're very critical of and say it's divisive, the Savarkar vision of cultural nationalism, of holy land and fatherland, effectively a Hindu Rashtra. But many would say the rise of the BJP coincides with the political failure of the Congress to give some flesh and blood to secularism. Instead of defining secularism, as you have said in your book, as pluralism, the Congress ended up in a sense being caught between the secular hare and the communal hound, guilty of both minority appeasement and majority pandering, capitulation to the Muslim fundamentalists on Shah Banu, and the other hand a willingness to perform a Shilanyas in Ayodhya as Rajiv Gandhi allowed. So I'm just wondering whether the Congress itself is a party which is capable of challenging the BJP's vision of Hindutva as you make out in this book.
Well, both the examples you gave are from the 1980s. We are now 30 years later. And I have to tell you that today's Congress is very self-confident in its convictions. After all, Rahul Gandhi has openly talked about his being a Shiv Bhakt. And as far as I'm concerned, because I've had the privilege of having private conversations with him about his beliefs, I know what he's saying is totally sincere. He's thought about these things, he believes them, he practices them. Now the main difference is we are not going to be silent in public and practice in private as had been the approach. We are going to be what we are in private and in public. But people will see there is a difference, that our Hinduism is not about discriminating against non-Hindus. It's also anchored very much in the constitutional values of this country. You know, you have a prime minister today who I have a lot of respect for in other ways, who says the constitution is his holy book, and at the same time extols every single day the works and ideas of Deen Dayal Upadhyay, who fundamentally rejected the constitution. Why did Upadhyay and the Hindutva leaders, including Golwalkar before him, reject the constitution? They said that the constitution rests on a fundamentally flawed premise about in answering the question, what is a nation? The constitution assumes the nation is the territory of India and all the people on it. Whereas for the Hindutva movement, the nation is not India. The nation is a people, and the people are the Hindu people.
You know, interestingly in the book you say, as a Hindu, I am proud to lay claim to the tradition of thought that began with the Vedas, grew under Adi Shankara, flowered through Bhakti, embraced social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Narayan Guru, has Swami Vivekananda and Mahatma Gandhi as its fountainheads. You don't mention Nehru, but we won't go down that route. But essentially what you're saying, I come back to it, you are trying to reclaim Hinduism from what you believe are the Hindutva forces. Now Narendra Modi could well say the same and just add the names of Deen Dayal Upadhyay and Golwalkar. That's, in a sense, he could also claim that all these individuals you mentioned are the fountainhead of his Hindu religious beliefs as well.
Except that Deen-Dayal Upadhyay and Golwalkar and Savarkar, for that matter, don't entirely believe what the people I've cited believe. Look at Mahatma Gandhi's Hinduism, and he was overtly Hindu. He was, in many respects, somebody steeped in the learnings of Hinduism. Look at his eclecticism, his Ishvara Allah Tero Naam, his bhajan ceremonies, his faith in ahimsa and in satya. All of these, which are derived entirely from the Hindu texts and Hindu teachings. Look at that and look at the doctrines of the Hindutva leadership. I have extensively quoted Savarkar, Golwalkar and Upadhyay in their own words, precisely so that people don't accuse me of misrepresenting or distorting them. Everything that they have stood for, I've tried to summarize very fairly and comprehensively. Let people tell me if they see anything in common with Mahatma Gandhi.
You make a strong argument in your book, and one of the strongest arguments is your sort of belief in Hinduism, which stems from the religion being a lived experience and not being caught in dogma or being caught in a holy book. But do you then believe that these efforts to Semitize Hinduism and make it, some would say, a mimic or a copy of Orthodox Islam with its emphasis on fatwas and blasphemy laws, the Hinduism of the kind which is practiced by the Gaurakshaks, how do you really believe that this Hinduism, which never stood for a single church or a single interpretation, can actually be used in today's contemporary context to challenge the Gaurakshaks?
Because theirs is actually an inferiority complex Hinduism. Theirs is a Hinduism born of a sense of persecution, of humiliation, of defeat, of being oppressed as they see it with 1,000 years of Muslims and so on and so forth, and then 200 years of the British. They have therefore a defensive, resentful, chip on the shoulder kind of Hinduism. Mine and the faith of most Hindus I know is a self-confident Hinduism. We can embrace our past, including defeats and failures, and live on our resilience. The history of Hinduism is a history of resilience, a history of reinvention, a history of reform. It's a self-confident faith that I want to speak about, and to my mind, that faith is a faith which people can, because of their confidence, can practice while accommodating all the others who want to practice their own faiths.
But many would say that faith today also needs a moral leadership, the kind that a Mahatma Gandhi provided. Mahatma Gandhi was a believing Hindu, believing in Advaita philosophy. Now, today the Congress party, or indeed our political class, seems to lack that leader with that kind of moral force who can reclaim Hinduism from the extremists. That's the point I'm making. How do you reclaim Hinduism from the Gaurakshaks or from from those who practice this kind of sort of aggressive politics against the minorities, a hateful politics against the minority, unless you have a Gandhi-like figure?
Right. So you need almost three kinds of figures. You need certainly a spiritual figure, somebody who, and I'm disappointed to some degree that many of the sort of 21st century Hindu leaders have not spoken out clearly enough for the Hinduism of acceptance that I describe. Then you also need very much, as you said correctly, a political leader, somebody who can, because when you're talking about the Gaurakshaks, you're talking about a group of people who are indulged by political forces. And therefore there must be a robust political opposition to those forces in order precisely to say that this is not the kind of society that we as good Hindus should be building, creating, or presiding over. And then you also need, if you don't mind me saying this, a leadership of ideas. We need to be able, after all, in Hinduism there's always been not just Bhakti Yoga but also Jnana Yoga. And of course Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga. You need all of those. Vivekananda incorporated all four in his life and is going forward. I would argue perhaps that in my own case I'm probably less good at Bhakti Yoga than perhaps I am at some sort of Jnana Yoga, even if it is through reading it in good English translations, but extensive reading. And the fact is that ultimately we need to be able to articulate what we stand for in a way that's compelling to people. I hope that this book is a step in that direction.
You are making a strong, persuasive, intellectual argument in this book. But it is one thing to seek solace in Dharma as the glue that will bind the secular and the religious as espoused in the Gita. But I come back to it. How will Dharma be interpreted on the ground? How will it be interpreted, for example, by a car sevak? A car sevak may well believe that in this nationalist fervor, building a Ram temple in Ayodhya is part of his dharma. You're not just challenging religion anymore, but you're also challenging this notion of religious nationalism.
Right. So, yes, I am. But at the same time, while I say everyone has to live according to his or her own Dharma, he has to do so within a social and political context where, for example, the basic principle of thou shalt do no harm is not just a Christian principle, it applies to us too. You can't, I've described very early on my own liberalism before explaining why I find it compatible with Hinduism. And my own liberalism basically says, you should be and become, you should have the right to be and become who you are, provided in that process you don't harm anybody else. That's provided is a very important condition. That's also a part of our political, social, legal order.
It's interesting hearing you say all this, because many will suggest that just like you, I am branded as a lip-tard, anglicized, missionary educated as
Macaulay Putra.
Macaulay Putras, who are in a sense trying to rediscover our religious roots. Now, there will be those, and you're a member of parliament from the state of Kerala, which has Hindus, Muslims, Christians living in large numbers. They will say now, as a declared Hindu, will Shashi Tharoor be misunderstood possibly by some minority voters for writing this book?
See, that is a risk I have to take as a politician, but I think they've also seen me around for the last 8 or 9 years in my constituency, and they understand that they're better off with a genuine Hindu who respects them and respects their faith and respects their way of life than with somebody who perhaps claims not to be religious but shows other sorts of biases. They know I'm not a prejudiced person. They know I represent them fairly and well. And therefore, the fact that I have sort of come out and said things that were always implicit in my behavior, I hope will not affect. But yet it's a risk I have to take.
My final question. Your book is premised on the belief that you think that Hinduism needs to be rescued in a way from fundamentalists and those who have, in your view, misused it for their political ends. Who is going to rescue it? Is it going to be, as you said, a man of ideas? Is it going to be a political leadership? Is it going to be a spiritual leadership, or a bit of all three?
As I said, one needs all three. I can't claim to any spiritual qualifications, but I certainly would like to contribute to the battle of ideas within Hinduism. As far as the political leadership is concerned, that will emerge, I hope, from the collective mass of politicians in this country. But ultimately, every Hindu, I believe, needs to reclaim for themselves an idea of Hinduism that they can hold their head up high and truly with pride say that they are Hindu. Today, this garv se kaho ki hum Hindu hai has sadly become code for belligerence, deliriousness, fanaticism, intolerance. I want to say with pride that I'm a Hindu who is accepting, who is open, who embraces others, who lives with others. That is the Hinduism that I want to reclaim.
Shashi Tharoor, as one Macaulay Putra to the other, thank you very much for joining us and for writing this book and igniting, hopefully, a rational debate on an issue that unfortunately divides a lot of Indians. But as you say, we are all Indians at the end. We need this book to unite us through religion, not divide us. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj.
Thanks for watching the video. For more such news and updates, please like, share and subscribe to India Today. Also check out our other great videos from our channel. We know you would love to.